with. But I really appreciate you attending. So first of all, we're back from the break, and kind of funny being away from class, especially when we only have 10 weeks together, but we did have that week off, some downtime. And now we're diving in with week 5. And remember, the class is only 10 weeks long. So we will hit on some course content topics, but I also want to talk through a little bit of what we have coming up. So obviously week 5 is just a discussion, and we are very familiar with those by now. But week 6 is something we really need to hit on because there are 3 different things to do for week 6. And I love that y'all are here because this journal abstract assignment, it's pretty straightforward, but for some reason, people often have a lot of questions about it and might kind of struggle with what the expectation is. So we're going to talk through it here on the video, and my hope is that that'll help. Before we do that, I'll just say, obviously, we've got a quiz for week 6, 3 different tasks, which for this class, that's more than we usually have. So week 6, we'll just take a little bit of planning ahead. For the quiz, I will post those study areas for focus ahead of time, as usual, in a little list. After that, we do need to submit in week 6 a final paper topic proposal. So in this submission, you are discussing what you're interested in for your final paper, and then submitting a strong thesis statement for that as well. So a thesis statement can just be one sentence explaining your assertion or your argument or your points of focus for that paper. To talk about the final paper a little bit, because it's going to be here before we know it, this is a research paper due in week 10. And this research paper, it's 5 to 6 pages long. I've got the description up here on the screen now. And what you'll notice is it's kind of a vague description. And the reason is because you can take this wherever you want it within reason. So basically what we're doing for the paper is selecting a topic, any topic that we have studied in this class. So something, grounded in the textbook and in our discussions or our assignments, something related to the field of psychology. And in this assignment, you're just submitting your idea. So my example will be sleep. Let's say that sleep and dreaming that's our focus topic. So then I'm going to be doing a paper here, completing and submitting a paper with 5 to 6 pages of research. And that paper is going to be covering 4 scholarly or peer-reviewed references to support your statements regarding sleep and the importance of sleep for mental health and well-being, and what dreams can mean, and that interpretation. You can pull in some Freudian theory there. So it's going to be 5 to 6 pages long, and it will be a research paper. So you'll need an introduction. Then you'll be going through a literature review, and that's where these minimum of 4 scholarly peer-reviewed sources come in. And those articles you'll find in the CCU online library. Obviously, it's valuable to integrate our course text as well as one of your sources to support your statements. And you'll be working through what is the research on sleep and dreaming. What does it have to do with psychological well-being, and what is the brain doing during those times and with those processes? And then ultimately, what's the conclusion with the biblical perspective? Because it's essential that we tie that in. So specific scripture citation, pulling together those conclusions so that we're hitting on that biblical perspective requirements. Other than that, it's really all about the source citation expectation of at least 4 scholarly peer-reviewed sources, and just researching something that's of interest to you. So if you can find a topic that you're passionate about, or at least that is interesting, that'll be the most important first place to start. If you're not enjoying your topic, or it's not something that you're passionate about, this is going to be a lot less pleasant. So strongly encourage you to tap into something that is an area of interest for you, something that kind of sparks your desire to learn more important to investigate as we've been moving through our course. So start reflecting on that now. And really, in the end, it's just a topic that you're interested in and research about it. And then in the end, we have to get that scripture incorporated. So that is the final paper. And for week 6, you'll be submitting your topic idea, which will just entail a topic as well as a thesis statement. What are you talking about, basically? And then finally, we'll take a look at the journal abstracts. And before we address these, does anybody have a question or comment regarding the final paper? Okay. You'll have probably taken classes before where the final paper requirements are really lengthy with a lot of really specific bullet points, and it's complex. That's not how this one is. It's really kind of open-ended for you as long as you're selecting a topic that's relevant for the field of psychology, researching it, and talking about kind of current trends in the field and what you've learned, and then ending with that biblical perspective. So it does give you a lot of room for creativity and focusing on what is most interesting for you. So for the abstracts, here we are. Once you are clear on the expectations here, this I believe will be pretty easy and straightforward for you. The CCU online library, and I'm sure many of you are already familiar with it. But I'm going to go to announcements. So I clicked on dashboard here in Blackboard, scrolling down to my announcements, clicking more announcements, and I'm scrolling because I know I've sent out a lot over the semester. Scrolling. And here is a picture of a book with this laptop. This is the online library guidance video. Okay, so I did create this. If you've not had a chance to look at it yet, this is a YouTube. It's roughly 10 minutes long, and it will walk you through how to use the CCU online library. And that is to find academic journal articles that are peer reviewed. So these must be studies. We don't want like a book review or a summary. We need something that has methods and results. And when we go back to the abstract prompt, you'll see where that ties in. So if you're not sure how to use the CCU online library or how to get to it, please check out that video lecture that we just looked at under announcements. For the abstracts, we're going to choose, as I said, 3 scholarly peer-reviewed full text journal articles. And the way you'll know that they're appropriate is you need to identify these categories: introduction, methods, results, and discussion. Abstract is basically a fancy word for summaries. So we're going to be choosing and summarizing 3 academic journal articles from the CCU online library. We'll talk about topic here in a moment. But first of all, again, don't use Wikipedia. It's not Psychology Today. This is the academic peer-reviewed research. So when you identify those, you're going to be finding introduction content. And when you discuss that in your abstract or summary for each of these 3 articles, you can break it into 3 pages, 3 separate pages with a cover page, that title page, and then a reference page. So on each page, you are writing 150 to 250 words. So that usually shakes out to be somewhere between half and 3/4 of a page. Again, this is all double spaced, Times New Roman 12, APA format, and you are summarizing the content of the article that you're reviewing, and you'll do that 3 separate times. And when you summarize, it is very important that we hit on each of these 4 points here in the prompt. And that is why we are making sure that we're selecting the correct types of articles, research studies that have participants in them, because we need to be able to address all 4 sections: introduction, methods, results, and discussion. So this is a study, kind of an experiment, if you will. These are projects that have been conducted to investigate a hypothesis, and we need real life participants because this is the field of psychology. So in your abstract, you'll do it 3 times. Your introduction will summarize what was the study about in the first place, what happened, basically. The methods, this goes into more detail about, X number of people received a survey addressing these topics, and you might pull in a little bit of demographic detail here. So, where were they? Were they all in one place? What was the male-female balance, for instance, or race or ethnicity, or whatever detail the paper gives you, just to explain the methods of the study. How did they select their participants, and how did they gather information? For the results section, this is kind of the big reveal. What did they come up with in this study? What were their conclusions? When they did these surveys, the results indicate that X, Y, and Z. So you'll explain that very clearly. And then the discussion, this is one of the most important parts of the abstract, and people miss this a lot. I've noticed a lot of people, I've taught this course for years, and people kind of just state the results and then move on to the next one. So the discussion is when we're talking about, why do I even care? What's the point of this research? The discussion section is where we say, real world implications or applications for the results of this research study. What's the big idea? What's the point? So sleep, we'll go back to the sleep. Let's say that there was a research study testing a medication for sleep. The methods they used were to do sleep trials and to measure the brain waves or patterns neurologically that they were identifying for X number of people. The results were that there was a statistically significant improvement for people taking the medication. And the reason this is important is because sleep heavily affects mental health and well-being, productivity during the day. It can even affect our interpersonal relationships when we haven't slept well. And therefore, this research is important because many people struggle and suffer with sleep disorders in the United States and in the world at large. So that, what I just said, is an example of a discussion for these abstracts. So again, 3 abstracts, 3 little summaries. Each one will be between 150 and 250 words long. If you are not sure about word count, you can just go to Google and type word count, and it'll give you a little thing you can paste your text into, and it'll tell you exactly how many words. Microsoft Word also has word count tools, but if you find it easier to just go online, that's honestly what I usually do. And it's just really quick to access it there. So regarding topic for these abstracts, you may choose articles related to whatever you want. So you could choose, as long as it's in psychology, by the way, but what I mean is you could choose an article about schizophrenia. You could choose an article about antidepressant, kind of SSRI medications, and you could choose an article about Erickson's theories of human development. Kind of 3 really different topics, but if you would like to get creative and branch out, that is actually a good way to prepare for what you want to select for your final paper topic. So you won't be graded down for that at all if the articles are unrelated to one another in content, as long as they are all research studies with participants that address all 4 points very clearly: intro, methods, results, and conclusion in your summary, your abstract. However, I will say what has been really effective for a lot of people is to choose 3 articles that are focused on what they want to do for their final paper. So if you want to write your final paper about mental health and homelessness or addiction, you can browse around in the CCU online library and identify which articles and which research studies might be most relevant as you study those topics. And then what you've done is you've developed and identified 3 viable sources which could be useful for your final paper. What we need to avoid doing is any kind of copying and pasting, because that would be self-plagiarism. So we can't take the content of our abstracts and copy and paste it directly into any future submission like the final paper. But you may use the articles you're summarizing for these abstracts as sources for your final paper that you can draw from again if you find them valuable. So while we're not using the same content we're submitting for the assignment, we can use the same sources in the future. I hope that that's kind of a helpful clarification there, because we want to avoid self-plagiarism at all costs. But the journal abstracts are a really good place to start if you'd like to be looking for sources related to your final paper topic. So that's what we have upcoming. Any questions on the abstract, final paper topic, or the quiz?
So for the abstract, you're just saying that we can use like the three sources that we use for the abstract, we can use those for the final paper. We just can't like use the same quotes in is that what you're trying to say for
Yes.
okay.
Yes, good question. Yep. So don't use your writing again as a copy paste, but you can reuse the sources. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Of course. So in a way, it's a little bit of a work smarter, not harder. You can build a body of evidence for yourself that you can then take that learning and apply it with new written content in your final assignment. So pretty cool opportunity. But again, if you decide to just completely take off and write about something completely different for this assignment, there's nothing wrong with that. Okay, so it's not required that the abstracts align directly with your final paper topic. So cool. Thanks, guys. We're now going to take a look at a PowerPoint presentation. And this is Yuri Bronfenbrenner. So last week we had a little bit more content focused on theories of development. Can you see that person's picture? Those who are here? Okay, I'm going to make sure that the share, wonderful. I'm going to make sure that the share is full screen for you. So I apologize. Let me get this sorted out. All right. Just want to make sure that I've got it shared correctly. Okay, and we're just going to run over a couple of these theories of human development. All right, so it's kind of fun to see the theorists, Bronfenbrenner, because often we hear their names constantly and we don't ever see their faces. So Bronfenbrenner lived from 1917 to 2005, and I'm sure you'll recognize his name and his work because he provided us with the ecological systems theory. It's kind of interesting to note that he did not die until 2005, which is not so long ago. So we often hear of these theorists and think of them as very ancient, but in reality, they are often more recent than we realize. So Bronfenbrenner wrote about 4 different types of systems in our communities that affect us and our development. The first and the most immediate system is the microsystem. And this is where our close relationships come into play. So often these will be parents, siblings, family members. It is kind of that first and immediate circle. The mesosystem is our larger circle, and that is our community. So we might think about like a church community here. We might have the exosystem, which is the bigger picture. So people who don't actually meet the developing child, but they're still impacting that child's experience. This might be something like a school board. And then ultimately the macro system, this is where we have our societal and cultural norms coming in, which is our standards. And that's kind of the big picture. So what's going on in our society and in our culture. And on the next page in this PowerPoint, you can see a visual that explains, for instance, in the mesosystem, I mentioned churches. You'll see this visual has churches in the exosystem, but the way that I would explain that is more like the Christian church as a whole is the exosystem, but the mesosystem could be that one particular church that a child attends, a smaller group there. And then within the microsystem, those that the child might encounter on a daily basis. And the macro system could be the belief of Christianity as a whole. So when you reflect on your own growth and development, you might recognize people and entities, structures, and variables in each of these 4 layers, and that would be the application of the ecological systems theory for us. 2 other important theories of human development are Freud's work and Erickson's work. And again, Freud did die in 1939, so he's an older, less recent theorist, but Erickson only passed in 1994, so again, more recent. The work of Freud, as you all are aware, it can get kind of bizarre to say the least. It is very sexually focused, but Freud's ideas that we take with us today in the practice are that our childhood experiences and relationships can have significant influences on our development and on our functioning and any problems that we might run into in adulthood. So, for a child who was abandoned multiple times and didn't have any consistency in his or her environment, the manifestation of that in adulthood could be troubles with trusting other people. And we might think that that's common sense and say, oh, yeah, of course, childhood affects adulthood. But in reality, many people might not have been aware of that or believed it until they started the work of Freud. And so while this really sexual focus is something that has kind of fallen by the wayside in modern practice, the ideas of Freud for the impact of childhood experiences have carried on with us. One of my favorite theorists when we examine human development is Erickson. And it's kind of funny, his name is matching there with Eric and Erickson, but that is his correct name. And he examined several different developmental stages, which you've considered already in our reading, but I thought it would be valuable for us to run through them here on this video. So we've got trust versus mistrust, which is the initial stage. And that's when a baby is first deciding if it can trust the caregiver. And so in each of these crisis stages, the concept Erickson was communicating is that we develop a determination one way or the other. And if we make the healthy determination, which is trust, autonomy, initiative, as we grow older, we'll be able to more successfully function as adolescents and young adults and even older adults and into the elder years. However, if we end up with a less healthy choice, such as shame and doubt or guilt due to our experiences, our environment, and our setting and surroundings, then we're going to encounter much more difficulty there. And that is where we would struggle to progress to the next stage. So an interesting one here to examine is identity versus role confusion. And this is what often Erickson would say is experienced in adolescence. People might struggle to understand who they are, for instance, outside of their family circle, what they believe, and who they want to be in the future. And then ultimately, adulthood, we've got 3 different stages listed here. First, for intimacy versus isolation. This does not have to look like marriage, but it often might. So this is that young adulthood, maybe 20s, 30s, 40s, will I have a lifelong marriage partner? Will I have a family? If I don't have those things, how will I connect in community with people in a way that my relationships are meaningful? Because obviously one does not have to be married, but if not, connection is still important. So how will I facilitate that social development and maintain it with my busy adult life and schedule? And from there, moving into generativity versus stagnation, this is the concept of the empty nester, where people are wondering, my life is in a new stage. Perhaps I'm working through retirement. What do I do here? How can I remain active and involved and creative, even if my physical health is decreasing in some ways as I grow older? And then ultimately reaching the stage of integrity versus despair. And this is the final conflict outlined by Erickson, where we're trying to make sense of life and deal with regret and guilt, because unfortunately, in a fallen world, these are some of the things that we're going to encounter. And so that is regardless of how we've lived our lives. Probably we're going to be looking back, if we're blessed to live that many years, to say, wow, I wish I had spent more time or energy on this or that. And the way that we resolve that conflict is going to be an important part of our continued development right up through the end of life. So that is the work of Erickson. I just want to make sure that we hit on that together before the end of our time today. So I'll stop that share. And it looks like Kara had some trouble with her connection, but Atticus, thanks for sticking with us. I'll end the recording.